All right, so blockchain. Um, I feel like it's one of those words you see everywhere these days, but to
Hmm.
be honest, I'm not really sure I fully understand what it's all about.
Yeah, I think that's very understandable. Blockchain can seem very mysterious, but it's actually a really fascinating technology, and surprisingly, it has a pretty long history too. It all started back in 2011 with the early development of Bitcoin.
Oh, so blockchain was kind of hidden inside Bitcoin.
You could definitely say that.
Right.
There was this concept called Nakamoto contracts, which were agreements that could be recorded and then executed directly on the Bitcoin blockchain. And that was a really visionary idea, if you think about it. Agreements that just automatically happen once certain conditions are met.
Hmm.
And it's all powered by this decentralized system.
Yeah, it does sound pretty revolutionary.
Mhm.
So why didn't it take off right away?
Well, there were definitely a few roadblocks at the beginning. I think, first of all, Bitcoin itself had a lot of technical limitations at the time. And then there was also a lot of skepticism within the community about expanding Bitcoin's use beyond just simple payments. And then on top of that, the miners, the people who actually process the transactions, they weren't really that interested in processing these complex contracts.
So it sounds like the technology just wasn't really ready for what people were envisioning.
Yeah, exactly. But that didn't stop developers from trying. They started coming up with these creative workarounds to try to bridge the gap between the real world and the Bitcoin blockchain. And one of the more interesting projects from that time was something called reality keys, and that emerged around 2013, 2014.
Reality keys. Okay, now you have to tell me more about that.
Okay, so reality keys focused on answering simple yes or no questions. And it was using the Bitcoin blockchain, but, again, it was limited by the technology at the time. The developer of reality keys was Edmund Edgar. And he had this vision of a decentralized Oracle ecosystem. So just imagine a system where you could take real world data, feed it into the blockchain, and then use that to trigger these contracts.
So it sounds like that was kind of an early version of what we now call smart contracts.
You're absolutely right. It was definitely a precursor to smart contracts,
Hmm.
but reality keys ultimately faced its own limitations, especially around centralization, which is kind of ironic because, the whole point of blockchain is decentralization.
Hmm.
And then in 2014, we saw the emergence of Counterparty, which was this platform built on top of Bitcoin.
Oh, so instead of trying to change Bitcoin itself, they just kind of built something new on top of it.
Exactly, that's right. So Counterparty let developers take more complex data and put it into the Bitcoin blockchain. And it basically acted as an early oracle. It was like a way to bring information that's outside of the blockchain into the blockchain. And this actually opened up a lot of possibilities for things like prediction markets and early decentralized exchanges.
It sounds like there was a lot of experimentation during this period. People were just trying to figure out what blockchain could do.
Definitely, it was a really exciting time for development. And one of the biggest challenges that people kept running into was this thing called the Oracle problem. And that's the challenge of how to bring real world data onto the blockchain in a way that's trustworthy but also decentralized.
Okay, the Oracle problem, I have to admit, that's always been a bit confusing to me.
Okay, well, think about it this way. Let's say you have a smart contract that needs to know the current price of gold to execute a trade. But how do you get that real world information into the blockchain so that everyone agrees on it and trusts that it's accurate? That's basically the Oracle problem.
Ah, okay, that makes more sense. So it's all about making sure that any data that goes into blockchain is actually correct and reliable.
Exactly. And in 2014, there was this project called Truthcoin that tried to address that problem. And they wanted to use a network of participants to kind of vote on the validity of data, almost like a decentralized jury.
Oh, so it's like crowdsourcing the truth. Did that work?
Well, it was a really cool idea, but it ended up facing its own set of challenges, building what's called a sidechain, which is basically a separate blockchain that's connected to the main Bitcoin blockchain. That turned out to be really difficult. And in the end, a working version of Truthcoin just never really materialized.
So lots of cool ideas, but a lot of obstacles along the way too.
Absolutely. But all these efforts from that early period, they really laid the groundwork for everything that was going to come next. And that's when things started to get really interesting because that's when Ethereum came onto the scene.
Ethereum, I have a feeling that's a pretty big turning point in this story.
It was a huge turning point because Ethereum addressed a lot of the limitations that all these earlier projects had been struggling with. And it really started to gain traction around 2015. Ethereum was designed from the ground up to be much more flexible and much more powerful than Bitcoin.
So in what ways was Ethereum actually different from Bitcoin? I mean, they're both cryptocurrencies, but I'm guessing there's more to it than that.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it. One of the biggest differences is that Ethereum has what's called a Turing-complete programming language. And basically that just means it can do a lot more. It can handle a much wider range of tasks than Bitcoin could, which allowed developers to build much more complex applications. And it also created a much more welcoming environment for developers in general, so it made it much easier for them to actually build things and then deploy those things.
So it sounds like Ethereum kind of opened up the floodgates for innovation in the blockchain space.
Yeah, you could definitely say that. And that shift to this more robust platform really marked a turning point for blockchain as a whole.
Wow, what a journey. So before we go any further, maybe we could just take a minute to recap what we've learned so far.
Sure. So we saw how all those early Bitcoin-based projects really struggled because of the limitations of Bitcoin itself. Then we had Ethereum coming along offering a much more flexible and powerful platform. And even though a lot of projects tried to solve that Oracle problem, it was still this persistent challenge. But all of those projects really laid the groundwork for the incredible blockchain landscape that we have today.
That's a great summary.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious about where does blockchain stand today? What can it actually do?
So today, blockchain is being used for a lot more than just cryptocurrency. It's really about creating these records that are secure, transparent, and can't be tampered with. And that actually has implications for pretty much every industry you can think of.
Wow, that's a pretty big claim. So where is blockchain actually having the biggest impact right now? Can you give me some examples?
Okay, well, let's start with what most people already know, which is cryptocurrency. So you've got Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, and tons of others. They all use blockchain to record transactions and then verify those transactions. And that actually cuts out the need for like traditional middlemen like banks.
Oh, so are we all going to be living in a world without banks soon?
Well, it's not necessarily about getting rid of banks completely, but blockchain really does offer a new way to manage financial transactions. Like imagine if you could make instant transactions across borders and they were super cheap. And you wouldn't need a bank to do it. It's a pretty powerful concept.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that could be disruptive. So what other industries are being impacted by blockchain?
Supply chain management is another really good example. So imagine being able to track goods from the moment they're produced all the way to the person who buys them. And you can do that using blockchain. And it helps to make sure that things are authentic, that there's no fraud, and it just makes the whole process of moving things around a lot more efficient.
So like if I buy a diamond, I could actually track it all the way back to the mine.
Exactly. And it's not just for fancy stuff like diamonds either. Think about food or medicine or electronics. Anything where it's important to know where a product came from and what happened to it along the way. Blockchain gives you this permanent record that you can always check.
That's really interesting. So it seems like blockchain could help build a lot more trust and transparency for consumers. What about other industries, though?
Healthcare is starting to use blockchain to store medical records, so this could totally change how our personal health information is managed and shared. It would make sure our information stays private, and it could help doctors and hospitals communicate with each other more effectively.
So no more carrying around those huge folders with all your medical records.
Yeah, hopefully not. Blockchain could make managing your health records just as easy as checking your bank account on your phone.
Okay, now I'm starting to see just how big of an impact blockchain could have.
Yeah.
So how is it different from these centralized systems that we all use now?
That's a really good question. And the biggest difference is how the data is actually controlled. So in traditional systems, there's one central authority that's in charge of managing and protecting the data. So that could be a bank or a government or a big company. But with blockchain, the data is spread out across a huge network of computers. So no one person or organization is in control.
So it's kind of like having one giant library controlled by one person versus having a bunch of different libraries that all have their own copies of the books.
That's a perfect analogy, and that's actually what makes blockchain so secure and so hard to break, because if you wanted to change something, you'd have to change it on every single computer in that network. And blockchain is also more transparent because all the records are publicly viewable.
So it's secure, transparent, and tamper-proof. Blockchain sounds like the perfect solution. Are there any downsides?
Well, it's definitely not perfect. One of the biggest challenges right now is scalability. So as blockchain networks grow and have to process more and more transactions, it gets harder to do that efficiently.
What does scalability actually mean?
Imagine a city that's growing really quickly. If they don't build new roads and new infrastructure, things are going to start to break down. It's kind of like that with blockchain. Every single transaction has to be checked and recorded across the entire network, and that takes time and energy. So figuring out how to handle huge numbers of transactions is really important.
So basically, as blockchain becomes more popular, we have to make sure the technology can keep up.
Exactly. Another challenge, especially with something called proof-of-work blockchains like Bitcoin, is energy consumption.
Yeah, I've heard that Bitcoin mining uses a crazy amount of electricity. Why is that?
So mining is basically the process of adding new blocks to the blockchain, and it takes a lot of computing power. Miners are basically competing against each other to solve these really complicated math problems, and whoever wins gets to add the next block, and they get rewarded for that. But all of that computing uses a ton of energy. That's why a lot of people are starting to look at other options like proof of stake, which uses less energy.
So there are ways to make blockchain less energy intensive.
Yes, and researchers are working on that all the time. And then on top of scalability and energy consumption, it can also be pretty difficult to develop applications for blockchain. And then finally, the rules and regulations around blockchain are still being figured out, which makes it hard for businesses to fully embrace the technology.
So it's a really promising technology, but it's still kind of early days.
I think that's a fair way to put it. But even with all those challenges, blockchain has a lot of potential to change a lot of things about our world.
You know, it's amazing to think about how we started talking about blockchain as this hidden thing inside Bitcoin. And now it has the potential to impact so many different parts of our lives.
I think it really shows you the innovative spirit of the people who are working on blockchain. They started with this fairly simple concept, and they've explored it in so many different ways, which has led to all the amazing things that we're seeing today. And we're honestly just getting started.
Yeah, that's what's so exciting to me. It feels like there are going to be some really big breakthroughs coming soon. What are some of the things you're most excited about for the future of blockchain?
One area I'm really interested in is decentralized finance, or DeFi. It's basically trying to rebuild all the traditional financial stuff, but in a decentralized way. And it uses blockchain to cut out all those middlemen and put the power back in the hands of individuals. So you could borrow money, lend money, invest money, all without needing a bank.
That's incredible.
Hmm.
Are there any other areas where you see blockchain leading to big changes?
Another area that I think is really interesting is digital identity. So imagine if you could control your own digital identity and it was all stored securely on a blockchain. Instead of having companies and governments manage it for you, that would have huge implications for privacy and security and just giving people more control over their own lives.
Wow, sounds like blockchain could really help create a more decentralized and equitable future.
I really do think it has that potential. We have to be aware of the challenges and the risks, of course. But the possibilities are incredibly exciting.
Well, I've learned a lot today. Thanks for taking us on this journey to the world of blockchain.
It's been my pleasure. I always love talking about this stuff.
And to our listeners, we hope you found this conversation interesting and informative. Blockchain is a complex and rapidly evolving field, but it has the potential to change the world in really profound ways.
And the best way to really understand it is to just dive in and start exploring. There are tons of resources online. And who knows, maybe you'll be the one to come up with the next big blockchain innovation.
That's a great point. So keep those creative juices flowing. And until next time, keep exploring the amazing world of technology.